For the first decade of the new millennium, the Minnesota Twins were considered by many as the model franchise. They had MVPs.
High and deep to left field. Oh, a home run from Arno, and the Twins win it 3-2.
Cy Young Award winners.
Another 1-2. Number 17. And Johan Santana has a 4-hit shutout.
And a good mix of young talent and veteran leaders.
Comes Torrey Hunter to win the game. He made the catch.
It resulted in 6 division titles in 10 years. But recently, the organization has struggled and performed below expectations. This fall, new leadership was brought in with the hopes of returning the Twins to their winning ways.
We will make a commitment to our people to bring championship caliber baseball back to the Twin Cities. It's something that our fans here so richly deserve.
How will they go about doing that? Tonight is a chance to get more insight. With baseball's hot stove in full swing, the Minnesota Twins decision makers weigh in on the future of Twins baseball. The Twins Town Hall, presented by Menards, starts now.
This is Twins Town Hall presented by Menards on a very cold night in Minneapolis. Winter has arrived with a bang, and things are pretty quiet outside at Target Field, but we are plenty cozy inside, and the Champions Club inside Target Field with a handful of season ticket holders. And those of you watching at home, we welcome you as well. I'm Marnie Gellner, and we thank you for joining us on this Twins Town Hall. And we will have a pretty open, honest, candid conversation tonight in that old-fashioned town hall style. And we'll be asking some of the tough questions. We'll be asking some of the things that are on your minds. We'll be involving you from home, too, with social media, and we'll have details on that in just a moment. Here are some of the topics we are going to cover in the next hour. We're looking at the new leadership of the Twins. They've hired Falvey and Thad Levine, and both of them will be answering questions tonight. We'll find out about their leadership styles, some of their philosophies, and how all of that will play into guiding this Twins franchise into the future. We'll also address the continuing development of the young prized pieces on this team. We're talking players like Byron Buxton, Max Kepler, Jose Barrios, Miguel Sano, some of the essential talent for this Twins team as it moves forward. And what does the future hold for this team? How will the new leadership build the Twins back into a contending franchise? We'll find out the direction. We'll find out the plan for the future from the very men who will be making some of the tough decisions. And in our audience tonight is Twins season ticket holders. But for you at home, you're watching our broadcast, you want to take part in this. This is a live broadcast, so we welcome your questions. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag TwinsTownHall, and we will be reading some of those questions throughout our live broadcast here in the next hour. But to begin the discussion now, we welcome in our host, Anthony LaPanta.
Well, thanks, Marnie. Always exciting to be talking baseball, and the temperatures are in the single digits outside. And we'll be joined by the manager of the club, Paul Molitor, a bit later in the show. But first, we are joined by 2 very special guests. 2 of the men who will be tasked with the challenge of getting the franchise turned around. Derek Falvey was named Executive Vice President and Chief Baseball Officer in October. He spent the last 9 seasons with the Cleveland Indians. Most recently as Assistant General Manager, he'll be responsible for establishing the vision for the Twins baseball operations. Thad Levine was hired in November as Senior Vice President and General Manager. After spending time with the Rockies and Dodgers, he spent the last 11 seasons as the Assistant GM with the Texas Rangers. Guys, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. We look forward to the conversation about what's ahead for the Minnesota Twins. Derek, let's start with you. You were involved with a team in the middle of a pennant race last summer when Minnesota and Terry Ryan decided that it was time to part ways. How quickly thereafter did you become aware of this as a potential landing ground for yourself?
You know, late in the regular season, I had an opportunity. Chris Antonetti came into my office and mentioned that Jim Pohlad had called our ownership and inquired about my interest in the Minnesota Twins job. And it was something I wasn't expecting, not necessarily expecting at all, but had spent time, certainly thinking about what it would one day look like if I were running a baseball operation. So had a chance to have a phone conversation with Jim and Dave St. Peter, and on from there it went.
How then did Thad Levine become a part of the plan?
So after having worked through and gotten the job here, had an opportunity to think through potential partners, leadership partners. And Thad's someone that I had come across and met in baseball a number of years ago. And you build lists of people that you meet around the game who you think might have an impact, who you'd like to work with someday. And Thad was one of those people. And when I got a chance to interview him and get to know it, it became so clear quickly that he was a great fit.
Thad, you were a part of a contending club, too. In fact, a contending club for the better part of a decade with the Texas Rangers. What enticed you most about leaving Texas to come to the Minnesota Twins?
I had a great experience in Texas. I owe a lot of my career and everything they did for my family there. So it wasn't really that I was eager to leave. I think one of the things that tie that bound Derek and myself together was the fact that we both came from great situations, so we were only going to leave if we found a situation as good, if not better. What enticed me to come here was the ownership group to start with, the Pohlad family. A lot of stability. I think one of the downsides of working in baseball, such as there is one, is there's a lot of instability. There's an expectation that you may have to work in a lot of different places. They offer an opportunity to have a bona fide career and work in your dream sport. That was one of the huge draws. Once Derek was also involved, I had such a great relationship with Derek and Chris Antonetti and Mark Shapiro and some of the other guys in Cleveland. The opportunity to work with a guy who had been molded by that group of people was really inspiring for me.
Derek, you've done everything with the Indians, from an intern to baseball operations to assistant general manager in 2016. I thought it was interesting when the manager of the club, Terry Francona, was asked about you and your role, and he said, if you ask me what he does, maybe the better question is, what doesn't he do? So if you've been a part of all of that, and you've had your fingers in a lot of things, how much of that will you now be forced to delegate to others? How much of it will you continue to try to make sure you're hands-on in all areas?
I appreciate Tito's comments there, and it's someone who I feel indebted to. He's helped me develop who I am in my baseball career. I think a lot of it's delegation. I think we need to empower a large group of people in baseball operations to lead, and to lead in all different areas, and areas we may have not gotten to yet. So whether that's in new areas of high performance or analytics, we have opportunities to lead across. I think Thad and I both view leadership as something that's a team sport.
Analytics is an interesting topic because a lot of questions from Twins fans is just how much you will use that moving forward. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention drawn to your youth and the fact that you guys bring a little bit of a new, younger vision, perhaps, to baseball. That, I thought one of your comments was interesting when you said our challenge now is to find a way to blend analytics with scouting. How will you do that?
I think that's the background we both come from. I think one of the misconceptions in the game is if you're below a certain age, which I once was and I no longer am,
I'm with you.
You're perceived to make all your decisions formulaically, whereas if you're older, then you're looking at your decision-making process through the scouting lens. I think we both come from groups where we always blended the two, so we're going to continue to do that. The analytics plays a role in every decision, but it's just a part of the puzzle, and it's not the final answer.
It's one of the challenges for baseball, right? I mean, everybody right now is trying to find a way to analyze players and more accurately predict what they're going to do in the future. Would you consider yourself more of the sabermetric study, the analytics study, or more of the old school trust your eyes type of guys?
I view it as a blend. I view it as an opportunity to try and take what we understand and see on the field and try and get as objective as we can about that information. So when people talk about analytics or saber, they typically talk about it as just numbers, that it's just a number that you produce and that tells you what the decision should be. We need to seek to try and quantify and any information that's qualitative, that we get from our scouts to help us remove the bias from decision making.
What were your impressions of this organization from the outside looking in before you arrived, in terms of how close they are to contending, to how deep the organization might be? What were your outward impressions?
I looked at it and said, I recognize they won 59 games last year, and I know that's very challenging to go through. I've certainly worked for a team that's done that before as well. I went and visited a lot of our minor league teams during that season, so I didn't have to watch it. Very therapeutic at the end of the day. But by the same token, when you look at a 59-win team, typically they're bereft of future talent. It's a lot of kind of guys at the end of their careers or minor league free agents who just happen to come to the big leagues because of a lot of injuries. I see talent up and down the lineup. So I see a group that's not a 59-win team. So listen, we're going to do a lot more than just roll the balls and bats out there and hope we do better, because we think we have more talent on the field than the record would indicate last year. But I think we're starting off from a much better place than the record would indicate.
We'll talk much more about some of the specifics, some of the players involved. We want to hear from you, the fans. You can communicate with us from home via Twitter using the hashtag TwinsTownHall. We'll hear from some of our fans in attendance here. We'll take a look at some of the off-season moves and the coaching staff for the Twins next on the Twins Town Hall.
Curve struck him out. A splintered bat. That's a fair ball. Cutter completes the cycle.
That ball is hammered.
Welcome back to Twins Town Hall, presented by Menards. We're at the Champions Club inside Target Field tonight, taking your questions and addressing some topics for this upcoming Twins season. We have Derek Falvey and Thad Levine with us. Paul Molitor will be joining us a little bit later. Gentlemen, question for you tonight. Some specialists hired in the offseason, the veterans and some all-time Twins fans' favorite players in Torrey Hunter, Michael Kadire, LaTroy Hawkins. Derek, I'll start with you. What went into that decision of bringing those guys into the fold and being part of the Twins special instructors?
Sure. As we got a chance to know a little bit more about the organization and about the players who had come before we were here, I mean, those three guys have reputations around the game, not just within the Twins community, but who they are as teammates, who they are as leaders. And when they reached out and we started our conversations and understood that they wanted to be a part of the Twins family, we talked about what that would look like and what their role could look like moving forward. And each guy expressed a unique desire to be a part of what we were doing full-time, all in. And I can tell you, we just had about an hour-long conversation with the three of them today to talk about different things we're working on this offseason, and we're excited to have them as part of the fold.
I would just say that, every franchise needs to have a competitive advantage to excel in the game of baseball. One of the competitive advantages for the Minnesota Twins is the sheer passion that people have around the team. And it's the fans here present, but also these three guys. When you hear them talk about their relationship and their connection to the franchise, it's unlike anything I've ever heard in the game. And that's saying something, because LaTroy's played in a lot of places. Torrey obviously got to start and finish his career here. Michael didn't finish his career here. Their affinity is to the Minnesota Twins. If they were going to work in the game of baseball, they wanted to work here. We wanted to capitalize on that passion and really help translate that to the players we have here now.
It's remarkable how many players have come through the Twins organization who have made that kind of comment, that they viewed themselves as a Twin. In your past, had you leaned on players, former players from your other organizations, to come in and try to have an impact on young players?
I think we both did. We both have been around organizations that have brought in people like that. Maybe not with quite the history connected to the organization that those three guys have, but certainly find value across the board with young players in acquisition decisions and what we do at the major league level.
I think we really refined our decision-making process once we embraced the player's perspective. So Michael Young, Darren Oliver were two guys in Texas who were instrumental, I think, to elevating that franchise to where it is today. It really rounds out the decision-making of the front office group when you incorporate the thoughts of players.
Are there specific things on which you'll lean toward these guys, different things that you want them to have an impact, maybe on the field but also off?
Each guy very differently. I think LaTroy has a passion for the pitching side, both analysis, evaluation, and then coaching and helping to develop our programs. I think Torrey and Michael have very different backgrounds and experiences, so we'll use them all in very different ways, but across the baseball operation.
Early returns is they've got a lot of advice on our wardrobes that we'll continue to tap into. I think one of the unique elements about them is that when we're talking about players, free agents, trade acquisitions, whether that's now or the trading deadline, these guys either played with somebody who knows the guys that we're talking about. So when we talk to our scouts about what's the makeup of a player, because we're going to be very attentive to the chemistry that we have in our clubhouse and how an acquisition could impact that, these guys, the scouts will be a little bit skeptical and they'll be speculating as to what that guy would do in our clubhouse. These guys know that because they can talk to people who've been shoulder to shoulder with them in a fight. That's going to be invaluable to us.
And they can give you evaluations on their wardrobe, apparently.
Right.
Make sure that they're up to speed. Throughout the night tonight, we want to hear from you, the fans, via Twitter. You can send your questions in using the hashtag TwinsTownHall. Our first question comes from Captain Lander, who says, what should Twins fans expect to be different while the new front office shapes the team for the 2017 season?
You know, I think we've already seen some things that might be a little bit different in terms of how we've gone about early on and making a targeted acquisition early on in the offseason in Jason Castro. I think we've started to operate a bit differently in how we're incorporating some outside decision makers and the three gentlemen we just talked about. So hopefully we'll see through the course of this offseason a build out of our baseball operation, adding in a number of different voices with different levels of experience and backgrounds to help us build out a diverse set of skills with our baseball operation.
And I think the thing that we really are trying to be disciplined to is the fact that we're not going to impact everything at once. And so everything that we try to impact, we want to do to the best of our ability. So I think we're going to start doing this a little bit more piecemeal. We can't have necessarily a 7-step plan right out of the chute. Like we have to address step 1 first and do it the right way. So we're going to be very mindful of that throughout the process.
Let's get another fan question with Marnie Gelder.
Well, this is Jaden, and I think you can tell by Jaden's wardrobe that he is definitely a Twins fan. What's your last name, Jaden?
White.
How old are you?
9.
9 years old. Who do you like? Who's your favorite player?
Brian Dozier.
Brian Dozier. Does your question have anything to do with Brian Dozier?
Yes.
What is your question?
Will Brian Dozier play with the Twins this year? If not, who would you switch out with him?
We're going to have Paul field that question when he comes up in the next segment. So I will tell you that when we think about any decision that we make, we're thinking of you. We're thinking of the next generation of Minnesota Twins fans. And so it's great to hear from you, and so we appreciate your passion for the team. Our goal here is to try to put the best team on the field each and every year. We want to have a sustainable chance to play late into the season, ultimately get into the playoffs and win championships. So we're going to try to make decisions with the best interest of the franchise in mind. So without getting into specifics about any individual trade-wise, that's something we're going to try to evaluate every opportunity we have when a team approaches us to express interest in our players. With regards to Brian specifically, you know, from the outside looking in, had a spectacular season. I mean, what he did in the second half was really an epic performance. We don't take that lightly. We think he's one of the best second basemen in the game. The industry values him similarly. They're recognizing his accomplishments, and that's just something we're going to have to continue those dialogues.
When you look at a guy like Dozier, did something that the Twins haven't seen in 46 years. A player hit 40 home runs. Nobody other than Killebrew has ever done it for the Twins. And it's a season that by a long shot exceeded anything he had done before. And it sounds like what you're hinting toward is that the value outside from other organizations might be at an all-time high. How do you balance that when you have a guy who might just be coming into his prime or might have had a season that's tough to match?
You know, it's always a difficult decision when you're talking about the players internally who mean so much to the Twins community and have meant so much to the franchise for a long time. I think in Brian's case and among a number of other players on our team, we know they're embedded in the fabric of who the Twins are. I think you always need to balance those decisions with, as Thad just said, the long-term health of the franchise. And I think each one we will visit and think through very respectfully and think through how that impacts the community and the team and what we're looking to build and put the championship caliber team on the field that this region deserves.
I think you just described the crux of the challenge of these jobs. And I would just say to fans, like, no decision we make is, quote, a no-brainer. Like, Derek has an inner circle. People contribute to the decision-making process. He ultimately has to make the call. But whether he's relying on 5 or 10 people, I guarantee you there will be no decision we make here where 10 people are for it and 0 people are against it. My opinion, if we are in that position, we're missing something because the other group thinks the same thing and somebody's missing something in that equation. So every decision we make is probably somewhere between 6 and 4 and 5 and 5, and he ultimately has to break the tie. So there are no easy decisions in these jobs, and so we'll take everyone very carefully.
One of the decisions you've already made involved a player who's been a big part of the Twins for recent years in Trevor Plouffe. What went into the decision to move forward without Plouffe as a part of the plan?
Yeah, I think in Trevor's case, another decision that was difficult. You know, you think through the impact that he's had on the Twins organization and what he means to the fans. And I think when you get to a point where you have to consider how your roster will be aligned and where there may be fits, you know, within the parameters of what you're looking at for your team construction, that was a decision we had to arrive at. And it's something that we certainly think a lot about, but we hope that with the configuration of the 25-man roster and the depth that we build, we'll be in a better place to start 2017 than we left it.
Let's get another fan question with Marnie.
And this is Seth Gow. Where is your Twins hat with the TC Bear ears?
I left it at home this evening.
Okay, and then you loaned it to Jaden.
Yes.
Who's your favorite Twins player?
Well, all-time Kirby Puckett, of course. Right now, Dozier, yes, just had an epic season, so I like what he's been doing.
But your question is something other than the one Jaden just asked, I would imagine. What is your question tonight, Seth?
When you see what the Chicago Cubs just achieved and how they got contributions from a guy like Chris Bryant and how he ascended so quickly, how can you explain the lack of that quick success with some of the Twins' top prospects, and I guess what steps can be taken to help them kind of reach that level of success more quickly?
Sure. I think every player arrives and contributes at their own pace. I think if you look across baseball, there are a number of players who are now elite members of teams in different organizations who may have not matured quite as quickly as some of the guys that you're referencing. So I think what we know internally is that guys like Byron Buxton and Max Kepler and Jorge Polanco and a number of the players that we have internally, I mean, those players are clearly ones that the industry we know value, and we feel like have matured at a fairly quick rate, given their experience in baseball to date. So we're excited about the growth of those players moving forward, but we have to commit to individual plans for each player and make them the best they can be in whatever time frame works, for that individual player.
You mentioned a couple names of players that have already reached the big leagues, guys like Buxton and Rosario and Kepler, that I think fans at least have some idea of what those guys might bring. When you step into a role like you did, how long is the process to try and evaluate what you have in your system, all the way down to rookie through AAA? It has to be a huge process to try to figure out exactly how far away some of those guys might be.
Sure. I think as you look from the outside and you observe an organization, you see how they run, you know some of the top prospects, but until you get inside and you have a chance to talk to coaching staff and the scouts and the people in the front office and everyone who surrounds the player, you don't really know, to your point, you don't really know what's here internal. I think that process is constantly evolving and learning about players. It never stops. So our job, and we hit the ground running, one of the first few days of the job that we had here were meetings with our internal scouting staff, with Rob Anthony and the group that was in the front office, and we're continuing to learn about where our players are and what their process may look like over the next couple of seasons.
I think one thing I've learned over my career is that you try not to name players, name prospects, because then fans have expectations as to when they should come up and how quickly they should develop. And in practice, as Derek pointed out earlier, like each guy just progresses at his own time frame. I guarantee of the next wave of prospects we have, somebody will pleasantly surprise us, somebody may have a setback. The point is, like, our jobs, if we're doing it to the best of our abilities, we'll have waves of players are coming, and then another wave after that wave, and another wave after that wave. And that's when player development and scouting is really clicking on all cylinders. That's our commitment, and that's the depth we need to create.
We have Tom Corbett here, one of our Twins fans. Tom, do you have an all-time favorite Twins memory?
Actually, just watching Killebrew and Carew and Oliva play way back at the Metropolitan Stadium. That's when I started watching. My dad took me to games, and just watching those guys, they were the ultimate Twins players.
Classic Twins.
Yeah.
What is your question?
My question more directed to Derek. Now that you have time to assess kind of all the players in your organization, what do you think about the state of the Twins pitching down in the minors, and when do you think they'll be making an impact up here in the majors?
Sure. Great question. I think, pitching is something that I'm particularly passionate about, something I've spent a lot of time working on. I think that pitching, in my mind, you certainly need to acquire talent and select based on, in my mind, an organizational philosophy on how we're going to select. But beyond that, I think there are unique tools that exist these days to understand a pitcher's repertoire a little bit better, to build on a pitcher's strengths. So we've gotten a chance in the early going here to talk to our player development people and understand a little bit more about our pitchers. And I think there are a number of pitchers in this system that have a chance to be major league caliber and have a chance to impact us in the short term. I'm excited about that group. But what we need to do is build individual plans for each of those pitchers consistent with our organizational philosophy and find ways to make each guy better every day. I know that sounds simple. I know that sounds like something each team would do, but we feel very strongly that that we have people in place and a group here that can build each pitcher's plan to maximize their strengths.
Do you have a philosophy, a general philosophy? For years, the Twins have been known as a control staff, and they did it at an elite level for a decade, where they were #1 in the league in fewest walks. The ERA followed it. Now, over the last 5 or 6 years, the walks are still at the elite level, but the strikeouts are down and the ERA has been high. Do you have a general philosophy on power versus control?
I just want to go on record as saying I also like pitching. This isn't an either or. You know, I think what you're talking about, everyone admired throughout the game what the Twins were doing during that era. They were pitching to contact. They played extremely good defense. And they got ahead of hitters, and they were constantly in pitchers' counts, which was very advantageous to that staff. I think it hinges upon you have to have an elite defense behind that type of pitching staff, because a lot of balls are put in play. You need to make outs when outs are there to be made. So I think that's not the only way you can build a staff. I mean, I think, you know, Cleveland had a tremendous pitching staff last year. You know, if you could build that type of staff where you've got elite swing and miss guys and strikeouts, that's, you know, the premium. The balls aren't put in play. It's much less likely that they're going to result in hits. So I think as any part of the club, you want to be as dynamic as you possibly can so you can win games in as many different ways as possible and not singularly dependent on any one way to win.
We'll talk a lot more about the construction of the pitching staff. Pitching and defense among the topics for discussion when we're joined by the team's manager, Paul Molitor, next on the Twins Town Hall presented by Menards. The Twins Town Hall is presented by Menards. Save big money on all your home improvement needs at Menards. Paul Molitor is beginning his 3rd season as manager for the Minnesota Twins. The St. Paul native was a star for the Brewers, a World Series champion with the Blue Jays, and then returned home to seal his place in Cooperstown. Molitor took the reins in 2015 and has overseen the major league debuts of some of the Twins' top prospects. Welcome back inside the Champions Club at Target Field as we continue on our Twins Town Hall presented by Menards, and our expert panel has grown by 1. We're now joined by the team manager, Paul Molitor. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. What's the transition been like for you with a couple of new guys in the baseball department?
Well, it's good to join these guys up here. I think the IQ average is diminished actually a little bit, but you know, it's been a really good experience. You know, Derek and I had some communication during the time where Cleveland extended its run into November, and you know, we just had to do the best that we could given the circumstances, and then Thad coming on board shortly after that. And we spent a lot of time here in the short term trying to help these guys understand where we're at the major league level. They've had a lot of questions for me, and you know, just trying to get on the same page and how we're trying to move forward as we head into 2017.
Let's hear from a fan with Marty.
And this fan is Chris Ekegren. Chris, are you a season ticket holder with the Twins?
My dad is, yes.
Your dad is. And what is it that you like about Twins baseball?
Well, I've been coming to games since I can remember, since I was yay tall. My dad was at both series in '87 and '91, so favorite memories, I mean, first player I ever knew was Kirby Puckett. Anybody asked me, who's your favorite player? Kirby Puckett, they'd be pointing at the second baseman. So just coming to games growing up, it's a really great bonding experience between my dad and myself. Fresh air now, especially in the new field. Yeah. The dome, a lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was kind of cool, especially the dome dogs. That was my favorite. But yeah, I just, you know, just love it all in general. I grew up playing baseball as well.
What's your question tonight for the panel?
I got a question for Paul. For being a player as long as you were, what's been the toughest transition going from being a player to being the skipper of the club?
Well, there's obviously quite a large difference. I think that, you know, as a player, you have a tendency to focus more on what your individual preparation is for a given day and a given game. As you grow in tenure, your leadership kind of, you know, works into that equation as well. But, you know, working in player development as a coach, you kind of have learned how to apply yourself in terms of a bigger picture, and ultimately the manager's job is the biggest picture. You know, you have to find a way to each and every day try to check in with your players, build the relationships, and then you have to go about establishing a game plan each and every day to try to give your team the best chance to win. So it's just trying to have a little larger vision, make sure you're trying to include as many things as you can to get the most out of the guys that you have on your team.
Part of that transition is also the fact that you go from a guy who can directly impact what happens on a specific play to a guy that maybe your impact on the game is from a little bit further away. How tough is that sometimes when you were a fundamentally sound player, the guy who everybody said he does all the little things well? How frustrating is that then to stand back and watch when guys make mistakes that you know you would not have made as a player?
Well, you know, you have to disconnect from that because it's a hard game. And, you know, when you're dealing with younger players that are trying to find their way, they're trying to get established. Last year we had to endure the very high end in terms of losses at the major league level. So, you know, if you start showing disgust or disappointment in the dugout, and it's just not going to permeate well through that clubhouse, you're going to lose their trust. So you try to be patient as you can, continue to try to teach and try to find ways to make them better.
We have a question now from Amy Capitola. I'm guessing they call you Cappy.
They do.
They do. Have you been a Twins fan for a while?
All my life, yes. Learned from my grandfather, then my father, then I'm the next generation.
Generations of Twins fans.
Yes, absolutely.
What's your question tonight, Amy?
My question is, what went into the decision to keep certain coaches and let others go this past season?
That's a, you know, it was a hard thing. You know, I told these guys right out of the chute, and I said, it's hard to evaluate your coaching staff when you endured a year like we did. You know, you try to look at all the areas. You know, you start with yourself. You do your reflection and your evaluation of things that you could have done better or differently or hopefully to improve upon. And then we had some discussions about the coaches. The two guys that we had to let go, quite candidly, were people that I worked really well with. I think Brunansky's a very good hitting coach. We talked about possibly getting a new voice for some of our younger guys. And, you know, in Butch Davis's case, there were some things that we want to maybe do a little bit differently. I told these guys I have to be accountable. I didn't maybe do what I could to help these guys maybe come along in a little different ways. But, yeah, it was a hard thing to do. We just thought in a couple areas we wanted to shake it up a little bit.
You mentioned Tom Brunansky, and he was a fan favorite here. He was a big part of Twins baseball. Mm-hmm. How much of that is something that fans will be able to see in maybe a different philosophy at the plate for Twins hitters?
Well, you know, I would say this, that each coach brings a different approach to how they coach the game. And everyone has a slightly different way of teaching hitting and communicating with players. And I think in James Rowson's case, our new hitting coach, he'll come in with a different, fresh perspective. I think how that bears out is really over time. I mean, none of these things happen overnight. There are no quick fixes. So I think, you know, James has views on what our hitters, you know, need to do to be successful, whether it's from a mechanical standpoint or an approach standpoint. So I think that'll play out over time. It's not an immediate fix in any way.
We're always welcoming your questions. You can send them to us via Twitter using the hashtag TwinsTownHall. Our next question comes from Wild Twin Viking, apparently a diehard Minnesota fan. And he asked a similar question what I just did. He said, what will the strategy be at the plate? And, you know, if you talk about a different philosophy perhaps that you'll see over time, is there something that you want to see just in general terms, this team, this lineup do differently or do better than what they did last year?
The game's changed offensively. You know, the strikeout rate has grown each and every year. I think over the past 8 or 9 years, it's up to 20% of at-bats in the big leagues are ending strikeouts, or roughly thereabouts. So I don't really necessarily just accept that as being fact. I want guys who fight. And I think one thing with your young guys you learn is that, you know, a lot of times you try to help them with their game plan each and every day and how they're progressing and things they're working on, and they have trouble carrying it over into games. But I just like an attitude of competing each and every at-bat. You're going to have highs and lows. You're more likely to have a volatile season from a younger player than a veteran player. But you have to find ways to fight through that. The more we can condense those periods where these guys struggle a little bit, you know, the better it's going to reflect in our wins and loss record. So, you know, James, a new guy, I think the players are really going to like him. A great communicator, certainly a hard worker. We did a lot of due diligence on his background and got a lot of high recommendations, and we're excited to have him on board.
Marnie?
Another fan question. This is Andrew Bryant. Andrew, what has drawn you to the Twins?
I've been a fan since I was a little kid. My parents actually used to videotape games and play them when I was 3 years old because otherwise I would cry and scream for baseball on TV. So it's been a part of my life since I can remember.
Really? I mean, no pacifier? I mean, that's kind of the
pacifier was the VHS tape.
Okay, whatever works. Whatever works. What's your question, Andrew?
So, Thad, you already kind of alluded to this, but the pitching struggles last year are well documented. But defensive statistics would suggest that the defense, particularly left field and shortstop, exacerbated those issues. What are your guys' plans to address those before the season starts?
You know, I think it's essential that our defense across the board is going to need to improve. We're talking about a very young position player crew as a whole. They're going to need to take steps forward across the board. And I think we feel as if the first step in terms of improving our defense was to add Jason Castro behind the plate. Then we need to challenge the younger guys to improve across the board. One thing that we've talked about openly is the need to have a little bit more of a veteran presence on this club, guys that these guys can use as role models and emulate moving forward, guys that will hold these guys accountable. Because from the outside looking in, you saw a lot of these guys take a first step in 2015, which maybe in 2016 they didn't make as demonstrative a step forward as they could across all facets of the game. We hope that if we surround them with the right type of veterans, we can see this group as a whole really take a step forward.
We have a Twitter question from Alex who wants to shift his attention to the corner infield spots. We talked earlier about Trevor Plouffe no longer being a part of the Twins club, but you still have a lot of guys in play at those spots. He says, what will happen at the corner infield spots with Sano, Mauer, Park, and others, including guys like Kenny Vargas, still in play? You still have 4 guys essentially for 3 spots there with first, third base, and DH. How do you see that playing out as you look forward to this season?
Well, it's going to be our job to try to make that work as the best way we can as we head into the spring. You know, we talked about our defense with the last question. I think Miguel going out to right field, we all knew that that was going to be a tough fit. It kind of just aligned that way, and to get him back in the infield was the right thing. And I think him knowing that going into spring training will hopefully help him settle into that position. I believe that he can be at least average, if not slightly better at third base with consistency and the right approach in his practice routine and all those type of things. The other at-bats are a little bit more challenging. We all know where Joe's at with his career and what he's done for this franchise. You know, I probably overplayed him the first half a little bit, and it maybe took its toll into the second half. Vargas and Park, we're hoping Park the second time around just comes back maybe with lessened expectations and not trying to live up to the hype of being the next Korean star coming over here to play in the States. You know, and coming off the surgery and everything, we're hoping his health allows him to come back and show us what he can do. And Vargas is an interesting guy because he's a switch hitter and he can hit it over the fence. He really hasn't shown the consistency up here yet. Not untypical, as some of our other guys have had that same issue. But we're going to have to try to blend it together the best we can, put the right combinations out there on a daily basis to give us a chance to win.
Do you think there are enough at-bats in 2 spots to keep all 3 of those guys as a part of a big league roster all year?
I think it's going to be tough. It depends on how many pitchers we end up keeping and how big our bench is and all those type of things. But we're might have to do some maneuvering there to make that work.
Marnie?
Bill James is a season ticket holder with the Twins. How long have you been a season ticket holder?
This is my 8th season coming up.
8th season. Where are your seats?
In section 112, right up from home plate.
Nice. Yeah. Very nice. What is your question, Bill?
I'd love to get an update on the status and the health of Glenn Perkins and Phil Hughes, and if you have any concerns about their ongoing health as they play through a long, grueling season.
Sure. I think with both guys, like any player is going through a surgery and coming back, you need to be carefully monitoring where they are in their progress throughout the offseason and really going into spring training. I think in Phil's case, he was a little bit maybe ahead of Glenn in his throwing program, and early on in the offseason, Glenn is progressing and working to get back to health. We would expect to see both guys pitching here in spring training this year, and ultimately, as you know, players kind of dictate that pace, you know, as to how they come back and how well they perform through that period of time. But we expect both will be pitching this spring for us in Fort Myers.
We have a question from a Twitter fan, Eric Leahy, who wants to know about what your feeling is when you look at the way pitching staffs are now being built. There seems to be a lot more importance placed and a lot more reliance placed on the bullpen. Do you look at different models and ways teams have built their staffs? Kansas City may be the best example that seemed to build it more from the back end than the front end and have success. Do you have a general philosophy in that way?
You know, I think each team is trying to find that competitive advantage, that slice that gets them ahead of other teams. And we've seen, certainly in the playoffs over the last few years, how bullpens can really shorten a game and how you can impact and leverage those pitchers. I think teams over the course of a season look to mix and match, you know, find specialists, right-handed specialists or left-handed, left-on-left guy. I think for us, we need to be open-minded to any construction of our roster that prevents runs. I mean, Thad alluded to that earlier. How we do that, each team, it's going to be unique, but you use the players you have in place and try and maximize their strengths to give you the best chance and give Paul the best chance to manage your game effectively.
By the way, I like pitching too. So, and in today's game, last year I think we were second in baseball in terms of innings out of our bullpen. We saw what happened in the postseason. No starter went more than 6 innings in a World Series game for, I think, the first time in history. So some of that has changed, especially in the postseason. But you have to have guys that can eat up some of those innings before, you know, you just wear your bullpen down to a point where they're ineffective when you get into the latter stage of the season. So it's kind of trying to find that right blend and how to move it forward given the personnel that you have.
We have a question from a fan at home. Matt Beck wants to know if you think there is a true #1 ace at any level in this organization.
Yes.
Good question, Matt. When you look at the, is it a guy that's in the big leagues right now, or is it, do you have guys on the way up that can be a true #1 at the front end of a rotation?
You know, I'll jump in on that. I think that I'll elaborate a bit. I think that when you look, I'll talk a little bit about my past experience. I mean, in Cleveland, so Corey Kluber is one of the pitchers that had developed into that true #1 ace, and I think Corey would be the first to tell you that he didn't come up through the minor leagues, you know, as that guy, as that prototype guy. And I think for us, we need to view the pitchers in our organization as each guy having a potential opportunity to grow into that kind of pitcher. I'm not a fan of limiting or putting ceilings on some of our pitchers. The goal is to make each guy better every year, find ways to impact their breaking ball development, improve their command, how durable they are. I think there are ways to do that. I think we need to maximize each guy's potential, and sky's the limit on a number of pitchers in our organization.
I think that's exactly right. You want your scouts to identify players that they can really dream on. Then you want to challenge your minor league staff to put together plans in conjunction with that player so they can realize their potential or even potentially really overachieve. And like, that's the goal. And so like when I answered yes, I think it's somebody in our farm system. I just don't know who that is today, because somebody in that group is going to overachieve significantly, become a Corey Kluber, become a Cliff Lee, a guy who wasn't necessarily on that track, but then they vaulted to that level due to their own hard work.
Paul, one of the guys that has been labeled that way for the last couple of years is Jose Barrios. You had a chance to see him in the big leagues. His numbers in AAA, absolutely dominant. His numbers in the big leagues didn't match it. Can he develop into that guy?
Potentially he can. I think that we're going to see exponential improvement with him each and every year he comes back here. I think he was one of the guys that, you know, Thad kind of referred to earlier, that they get labeled as prospects and expectations before they get here. And it's almost impossible for them to meet that, at least right out of the chute. You know, you don't get that guy winning the MVP in his second season like Chris Bryant very often, in the same way it's Cy Young's for pitchers. So you got to remember his age, what he's trying to overcome and trying to get up here and get himself established. He's got the arm. We didn't see the command that we need to be effective on a consistent basis up here, but he's a worker. He dreams big. You know, we just got to stay the course with him, do some of the things that Derek talked about to try to make him better as he comes back here into this spring training.
Marnie?
This is Steve from Minnetonka. Steve, do you have an all-time favorite Twins memory?
I spent a lot of time out at Met Center growing up, so Kirby Puckett was probably my favorite player.
It's kind of a theme around here tonight.
Yep.
What is your question?
So 2015 showed some favorable progress, and then 2016 took 6 steps backwards. Being new to the organization, how do you go about analyzing what the failures were and what needs to be done to fix it?
I think we look at it as a world of opportunity, you know, and we don't want to minimize what the fans went through last year in terms of watching the sheer volume of losses. But I actually don't think we look at it as there was a 6 steps backwards. I think, you know, there's a lot of subtle forks in the road throughout a season which can lead you down a negative path, and those things start spiraling out of control. Then you enter September, and like there's wide gaps then made between teams that up until that point may have been a little bit more competitive. So I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that what we just witnessed in 2016 was the exception, not the rule, based upon the talent we had on the field. So we're expecting to make significant steps forward by just hitting the reset button. But then we're also going to put a lot more resources around the players, you know, around the staff as well, to put them in the best position to succeed so that they can really try to maximize the ability of these players and get them on the right track. We've got the right players. We need to augment that group. We've got the right staff. We've got the building blocks in place. We're ready to take a huge step forward this season.
It's time to step aside here on our town hall. When we return, what are the next steps for Minnesota? What's ahead for this Twins franchise? Find out when the Twins Town Hall presented by Menards continues.
Catch Byron Buxton took a home run away.
Welcome back to Twins Town Hall, presented by Menards. We are inside the Champions Club at Target Field, and we have a Twins fan here. This is Andy from Bloomington. Andy, Twins fan for a long time?
For a long time, yeah. My all-time Twins player is probably Doug Minkiewicz.
Really? We don't hear that one too often.
It's a hard name to spell, yeah.
Can you spell it?
Not out loud, I don't think.
What's your question?
This is for the two new guys. The book Moneyball is kind of an introduction to analytics for a lot of fans. Were you guys inspired by that? Do you hold it as like a sacred text?
I don't know if I'd say I hold it as a sacred text, but it's definitely one of the books that I'd read early on, you know, when thinking about working in baseball. I think what Moneyball, you know, has it just shows to a lot of people is trying to find a way to exploit an inefficiency in the market. And I think a lot of that at the time was statistical analysis. But really what it boils down to is trying to figure out, we talked earlier about the slice of competitive advantage that we can figure out. That's what Moneyball was all about. And I think it also potentially opened up the door for a lot of people to work in the game that may have had different backgrounds, or it inspired them to potentially work in the game that had different backgrounds. And I know for me, it played a role in that way.
I think it did everyone who works in baseball a disservice because none of us look like Brad Pitt.
We have another question from a fan at home via Twitter. Just waiting for the yes answer again here. Andy says that he wants to know, when you look back at the last couple seasons, and you talked about the fact that you want to show that 2016 was the aberration, not 2015. Which players are most significant on the current roster to show that that's the case? The players that might be able to take the next step and make sure that this team looks more like the 2015 version than 2016.
You know, I don't know that I'd single out any one player. Maybe Paul could talk about that a bit too. But it feels like we talked earlier about young players developing at the major league level and developing at a different pace. I think we've seen some young talent on this field really hit their stride this year at different times. You know, and I would expect that collectively as a group, those young players, as they now get into an additional year of service and understand what the major league game's about, we'll see a lot of guys, you know, take that jump. We expect a great number of our guys to do that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't single anybody out either. I think the development as a group, you know, talking about Minkiewicz, you know, when those guys came in '99, I think we had a large crop of young guys, and they had to kind of go through the growing pains, and they turned into good players and really good teams, and they were complemented by little additions here and there to the pitching staff. You know, someone talked about the Cubs earlier this year, or earlier tonight, and, you know, they have young players, but some of those guys have been around 3, 4, 5 years now, and they have nice complementary veterans, including some pretty darn good pitching. But it takes time. I wouldn't want to put that on any one particular player, but I think some guys are going to start to emerge.
So you were the one guy here who's been involved in both of the last two seasons. Do you think the 2015 Twins are closer to what we'll see in 2017, or do you think that it'll end up closer to last season?
I think that I'm much more on the 15, and I don't just say that because I'm an optimistic person. You know, as Thad alluded to, there are little forks in the road that sometimes make the end product a lot worse than what you might personally feel about it. I have to wear that. I have to live with it. I have to talk to people about it on a fairly regular basis. You know, you lose 103 games or whatever it is. So, But I think it's a fine line, and people sometimes think you're crazy when you say that. The start was horrific. I could have done better or tried to find ways to sustain us through that tough time, and we dug a terrible hole. We played 500 ball for about 80, 90 games in the middle, which isn't nothing to hang your hat on, and then we let it slip away again at the end. So I see it as half full for sure, and pushing towards the full side.
Time for our Menards look ahead to what's next for the Minnesota Twins. Coming up, it's Twins Fest here at Target Field, January 27th through the 29th. The pitchers and catchers will report to spring training on February the 13th. The first full squad workout in Fort Myers is on February 19th, and then opening day 2017, Twins and Royals on April the 3rd. Thank you very much to Derek Falvey, Thad Levine, Paul Molitor for joining us tonight. We appreciate your answers. Thanks to our audience tonight for providing questions. And to those of you at home who joined us via Twitter, thanks for watching. This has been the Twins Town Hall presented by Menards.
Great gifts are around the corner at the K&G Holiday Event. Give one and get one. 2 men's suit separate jackets plus 2 vest or pants for only $199.99. And stay cozy this season with buy 2, get 1 free on sweaters. Happy holidays from K&G.